On the morning of November 5th, 1989, two people were shot dead inside a bedroom in Coral Reef, San Diego. The man was one of the most powerful attorneys in California. The woman next to him was his new wife, young beautiful, everything he had left his family for. The killer didn't break a window, didn't pick a lock, didn't sneak through the dark. She walked in through the front door with a key she had refused to give back. She stood at the foot of that bed, looked at the two people who had destroyed her life, and pulled the trigger. Then she sat down, called her daughter, and said, "I finally did it." Her name was Betty Broderick. She was 44 years old. She had 4 children, a beautiful home in La Jolla, and had spent the last 16 years building a life for a man who decided she was no longer useful. This is not just a story about a murder. This is a story about what happens when someone takes everything from you, and the system lets them get away with it. Betty and Dan Broderick met at a college mixer in 1965. She was sharp, funny, confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately became the most interesting person in it. He was pre-med, ambitious, with the kind of quiet determination that makes people believe in you. They fell in love fast and married young. The plan was simple, at least it seemed simple at the time. Betty would work while Dan finished medical school. Then she'd keep working while he went through law school. It was an investment in their future together, and Betty committed to it completely. She waitressed. She tutored students. She patched together every dollar she could find while raising their children and running the household alone. There were nights Dan was studying until 3 a.m. and Betty was awake with a sick baby, already calculating how much she needed to earn the next day. It was hard, but they were building something together. Dan graduated from Cornell Medical School and Harvard Law. He became a malpractice attorney in San Diego, and he was brilliant at it. Within a few years, he was one of the highest earning lawyers in Southern California. They moved into a 5,000 square foot home in one of the most expensive zip codes in the state. They had 4 kids, luxury vacations, country club membership. From the outside, Betty Broderick had everything. What nobody saw was that somewhere along the way, Dan had stopped seeing her as a partner. She was the house, the kids, the logistics, the background. It was the success story. And in 1983, he hired a 21-year-old receptionist named Linda Corkina. Betty noticed the shift before she had any proof. Dan became distant in the specific way that people become distant when they're emotionally somewhere else, less present at dinner, irritable about small things, quick to dismiss her opinions, her feelings, her observations, things he had never done before. When she brought it up, he told her she was paranoid, insecure, unstable. She started paying attention. The late nights, the business trips that multiplied, the way his phone would go silent when she walked into a room, the way he talked about Linda too casually, too often, with the particular kind of nonchalance that people use when they're trying very hard to seem like they have nothing to hide. Betty confronted him directly. He denied everything. She found evidence. He called her crazy. She begged him to go to marriage counseling. He agreed once, attended one session, and never went back. In 1985, after 2 years of denials, Dan Broderick finally admitted the affair and filed for divorce the same week. What came next was not a divorce. It was a demolition. Dan was one of the most connected attorneys in San Diego. He knew every judge, every court clerk, every procedural trick in the book, and he used all of it not to settle things fairly, but to grind Betty down until she had nothing left. He froze her bank accounts without warning, leaving her with no access to money she had helped earn for 15 years. He paid her a monthly allowance that he could increase or decrease based on her behavior. He delayed hearings for years using procedural maneuvers that Betty, without a lawyer she could afford, had no way to counter. When she violated court orders, even minor ones, even in moments of desperation, Dan made sure she was held in contempt immediately. When he violated them, nothing happened. His colleagues were the ones enforcing the rules. He moved Linda into the family home, the home Betty had chosen, decorated, and filled with 16 years of her life. He changed the locks and had Betty's belongings dumped on the driveway. He recorded her angry voicemails and played them for the children. He coached the kids to call Linda the fun one. And when the divorce was finally settled in 1989, after 4 years of legal warfare, Betty received $30,000 a year in alimony from a man earning over $1 million annually. The judge called it fair. Dan and Linda got married 2 weeks later. The years between the affair and the murders were not a slow descent. They were a controlled demolition, brick by brick, conducted by someone who knew exactly which walls to knock down first. Betty's behavior became erratic, and in hindsight, it's almost impossible to say it shouldn't have. She drove her car through Dan's front door after he refused to let her see the children. She left a profanity-filled message on his answering machine on Christmas morning. She spray painted the inside of his house during a visitation exchange. Each one of these incidents was documented meticulously by Dan's legal team. Each one was used in court to paint Betty as unstable, dangerous, unfit. Each one cost her more custody time with her children. What the court records don't fully capture is what was happening on the other side. The months Betty spent fighting to see her own kids and losing. The holidays she spent alone because the visitation schedule kept changing. The moment she realized that the legal system she trusted to protect her was the same system her ex-husband had spent 20 years mastering. She had no money, no lawyer, no leverage. He had all three. People who knew Betty during those years describe a woman who was still sharp, still articulate, still capable of great warmth, but who had developed a kind of obsessive focus on Dan and Linda that scared the people closest to her. She couldn't let go. Friends tried to help her move forward, and she couldn't. Therapists suggested medication, and she refused. She called Dan's answering machine hundreds of times. She left messages that ranged from pleading to furious to devastated. Dan kept every single one. In October of 1989, Dan and Linda won a final court ruling that effectively ended Betty's ability to contest the divorce settlement. She had lost, completely and officially. And something in her finally broke. On the night of November 4th, 1989, Betty Broderick took a key she had kept from years earlier. She drove to Dan and Linda's house in Coral Reef. She let herself in through the back door while they slept. She walked through the dark house she had never been inside, through rooms decorated by the woman who had replaced her, past wedding photos she had never been meant to see. She opened the bedroom door. What happened in the next 30 seconds ended 2 lives and destroyed several others. Betty fired 5 shots. Dan was hit twice. Linda was hit 3 times. Neither of them survived. Betty walked out of the house, got in her car, and drove away. She called her daughter Kim from the road and said, "I just shot your father." She turned herself in to police the same morning. At the station, she was calm, cooperative. She didn't deny what she had done. She had been a woman completely out of options for years. And somehow, in the worst possible way, she had found one last option remaining. Our first trial ended in a hung jury. The jurors couldn't agree on whether what she did was murder or the inevitable result of years of psychological destruction. Her second trial convicted her of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Betty Broderick was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. She has been denied parole multiple times. She is still incarcerated today. The Betty Broderick case became one of the most debated true crime stories in American history. Not because the facts are unclear, but because they're so painfully complicated. 2 people are dead. That is real, and that matters. Dan, and Linda Broderick did not deserve to be shot in their sleep. Their families lost them in the most violent and senseless way possible, and that grief doesn't disappear because of the circumstances that led there. But Betty Broderick's story also forces us to ask questions that don't have comfortable answers. What do we call it when someone uses the legal system as a weapon? When a man with unlimited resources and insider knowledge systematically strips his wife of her money, her children, and her dignity over 4 years, and the courts allow it because he knows how to work them, what is that? Is that justice? 2 television movies were made about Betty Broderick. Books were written, documentaries produced. Every time her parole hearings come around, thousands of people write letters, some demanding she stay locked up, others arguing she has served enough time for crimes that didn't happen in a vacuum. She has never shown the remorse that parole boards want to see. In interview after interview, she speaks about Dan with the same mixture of love and rage she felt in 1989. Some people see that as proof she's still dangerous. Others see it as proof that some wounds simply don't heal. What I keep coming back to is the deal they made at the beginning. Betty worked. Betty sacrificed. Betty built something alongside someone who later decided she was replaceable. And when he replaced her, the system that was supposed to protect her handed him the tools to finish the job. I'm not telling you what to think about what Betty did, but I am asking you to think about what was done to Betty first. Next week, we're covering a case that starts almost exactly the same way. A spouse betrayed, a system that fails them, except this time, the person who was wronged found a way to get even without ever touching a single hair on anyone's head. The revenge was completely legal, and so much more devastating because of it. Stay safe out there, and think twice about who has a key to your front door.